And now I invite Engineer Salam Sharif to chair the session. Engineer Salam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swaliha. You've been doing a great job for the recycling industry by holding a lot of webinars, and that itself promotes the circular economy. We appreciate the efforts you've been doing, and thanks for having us on this webinar today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to just to start with the fact that copper is being the topic of today, and no wonder. When it's called Dr. Copper, it's just because it's the commodity that is really determines the pace of the economy and can predict how turning a lot of economies and how the growth prospects are foreseen in a lot of developing countries. The fact that it is indispensable commodity, and any gadget or any kind of day-to-day households, rather life without copper cannot be going on. I'm gonna just get, in fact, the first speaker, who is Mr. Mayank, the managing partner of Jade Metals Group, to have the floor. But before I say that, I would like to say the fact that India is being the second largest economy in terms of the second fastest economy, rather, in terms of its growth. And it holds a very, very important market position with relates to the copper recycling and all the metals in general. Mr. Mayank, I would like you to start off by giving us your insight throughout the presentations of yours, and we will follow it up with some Q&As. So Mr. Mayank is the managing partner of Jade Metals Group. In fact, the group has been known to me for the past 3 decades. We've done a lot of business together, and it has been timely just to have one of the leading pioneers in the business to share his thoughts about the Indian market. Mr. Mayank, the floor is yours. Please go ahead and give us your insight.
Thank you so much, Engineer Salam. Good afternoon to everybody in this August forum of viewers. I would like to thank the organizers of this event to have thought of such a meaningful program. And I would also like to thank them for inviting me as a speaker in this forum. Today, I would like to highlight in brief the state of copper and copper recycling pre-COVID era, the impact of COVID on Indian economy, and copper industry and copper recycling in India, and how do we view the recovery and the road ahead for the economy, for copper industry, and for copper recycling in India. So, if we look at the figures pre-COVID time, India used to have a total production of somewhere around 1.1 million tons of copper. Out of this 1.1 million tons, if we look at the sourcing, primary products contribute somewhere around 800 tons per annum, while recycled and secondary products used to contribute somewhere around 300,000 tons per annum. And if we look at the consumption of this production, the consumption of this production of 1.1 million tons per annum, some 350,000 tons used to be exported, and some 750,000 tons per annum used to be consumed domestically in India. Now, coming to the recycling secondary copper sector, out of these 300,000 tons produced annually, some 150,000 tons used to be produced through import of scrap from outside India, and some 150,000 tons per annum used to be produced through the recycling of scrap which is produced domestically. So this was the situation pre-COVID times. And COVID lockdown, the ripples of lockdown, we started feeling the ripples in the beginning of March itself. But then by the end of March, exactly speaking on 25th March, India went into complete lockdown, which continued up to end of May. And this was a complete lockdown of somewhere around 75 days. And during this period, industries closed down. Only a few industries were running, that too at a very nominal level, and most of the businesses were closed down. So I suppose, except for the medical sector and some emergency sectors, the country was not working. As a result, there was contraction in economy. June quarter result of, GDP have come out, and Indian economy has contracted by 24% annualized. Recently, a couple of days back or 3 days back, Moody's released its data, which said that Indian economy was contracted by 10.5% annualized in June quarter, and 20% was contracted in June quarter, and it is expected that Indian economy would contract by 10 or more than 10% in this financial year. So this has impact on copper demand also. Copper demand in June quarter fell by 20%, and if we talk of financial year 21 as a whole, it is expected that the copper demand will be lower by 5% than the previous year. So this is the impact of COVID on Indian economy and copper industry as such. But then there are efforts and there are natural tendencies for the economy to be back on track. Moody's has projected that there would be a growth of more than 10% in financial year 21-22, basically led by many factors. The suppressed demand caused by COVID lockdown has to come back. Finally, India is a country which is having a population of 1.3 billion, and the demand has to come back. If we look at the general environment, almost everything has come to a routine in India. People are out, they are working, and they've started consuming. So gradually the demand will come up. Other than that, in order to come out of the negative impacts of COVID lockdown, government declared many measures to bring the economy back on track. Stimulus packages were declared, and there is a large infrastructure spending going to be done by the government. So that would also have an impact. Third factor which would have an impact on growth of GDP or coming back GDP on track in the next financial year is Make in India drive. This government, since its inception, has waged this campaign of Make in India, which has actually gained momentum over the period, but now it has got intense after COVID. The government is quite focused, and this has also been fortified by the fact that there are a lot of foreign direct investments which are coming to India. While India was under lockdown during May and June, the foreign direct investment was coming to India, which shows the multinational corporations have faith in Indian economy. New investment has come up into India, and it will have an impact on revival of the economy. So in all, it is expected that economy will be growing by double-digit figure from the next financial year. So this year, while we have a gloomy scenario, the next year we feel there would be a speedy recovery and economy will grow at a very, very rapid pace. Now, coming to copper demand, when the economy is growing, definitely copper will also grow, because this is one of the fundamental metals which is used in various aspects of life and economy. And because of this growth, which has some definite drivers, for example, Make in India drive, which I explained, and infrastructure spending, which I explained, defense spending is another big area. And as you know, India has been one of the largest buyers of arms and ammunitions and other defense effects. And because of Make in India drive, government is quite focused on indigenization of arms, ammunitions, and other defense effects. And not only that, the government is quite focused of developing defense manufacturing to an extent that it may export. As a result, defense industry is expected to grow, and it consumes a lot of copper. Infrastructure spending, the government is quite focused on electrification of remote areas in India. There are still many parts in India which have yet to be electrified, and the stimulus package that the government came out with post-COVID has a lot of focus on electrification of rural areas. There is a big effort going on laying the web of telecommunication throughout India, especially the interiors of India. Railways and metro, government is doing a lot to expand and widen the network through infrastructure spending. And one of the major thrust area is renewable energy. The government is focusing on, and it wants to get rid of fossil fuel based power generation. So all these sectors will have a lot of consumption of copper, which will lead to a good demand of copper in India. Now, what are the factors which spur the copper recycling sector? Definitely, one factor is sure that if copper demand is increasing, definitely copper recycling will also increase, because part of the copper demand would surely be met by copper recycling. So, copper recycling sector is directly linked. It will actually grow. But then other factor is that the government is quite serious and bringing about regulations for systematic collection and systematic recycling of scrap in India, which I will discuss in the next slide. And the other factor is that India of late has become, or is on the path of becoming, a global recycling hub post Chinese restrictions. So coming to the systematic collection and recycling of scrap, India still does not have very organized collection of end of the life consumer items. And with the growing middle class in India, the consumption of electric items, electronic items, mobiles, etc. is growing, and they have a very short lifetime. So there is a lot of end of the life stock which comes up every day, and which in absence of a systematic collection may pose environmental hazards. Recently, Government of India has come out with many rules and regulations to promote the systematic collection of end-of-the-life items. Same is the case with vehicles. India so far does not have any statute for vehicle scrappage. By the end of this month, it is expected that the Government of India is coming out with the scrappage policy, and taking cue from the fact that the government is promoting, or government is promulgating a policy for scrappage of vehicle. Tata, Mahindra, Toyota have already set up automobile dismantling yards. So all these regulations which are aimed at systematic collection of scrap, and once there is systematic collection, definitely the scrap comes into organized channel. All these factors are surely going to have a positive impact on copper recycling in India. Coming to the fact that post-Chinese restrictions, India has slowly started taking a space of global recycling hub, is supported by the fact that India has liberal regulation for import of scrap. It is coming, and India has a long coastal line. It has very well developed coast at eastern side and also at western side. There are industrial hubs which are already into recycling activities. So this is a favorable factor. And the most important is the low processing cost. India, especially the workforce is not so costly. And recycling has one aspect that it requires a lot of manual intervention. So with the cheap workforce, India is able to produce at a low cost. Therefore, India is gaining momentum as a global recycling hub. So in all, I surely expect the recycling in all the domains, and especially in copper domain, to grow in India over the next few years or few decades. There was a draft non-ferrous metal policy released by the Government of India. It is a draft policy in which I was reading the contribution of recycling. Presently, contribution to GDP is somewhere around 3%, while by 2030 the government expects that the recycling sector will contribute somewhere around 11% to GDP. So we foresee a good future of recycling in India. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayank, for a great insight and a very informative presentation. We really believe that India, with its very rich in terms of its resources, mainly human capital and natural resources, apart from the entrepreneurial thoughts of its young population, which is making about 70% of the population are in the age of below 30. That's definitely a great future for the recycling industry as a whole. And we will be coming into Q&A, Mr. Mayank, right after we hear from our next speaker, Nikolai, Engineer Nikolai of MARKETOUTLOOK. He is a well-known figure into the market. He's been visiting the Middle East quite often. MARKETOUTLOOK Group is known to a lot of you, and to me personally, I think when it was named Metallurgic, I visited their plant in 1987. At that time, what was impressive to me is that as we were driving down the road to reach to the plant, I never realized that we're going to a copper recycling plant, because it was in such a inhabitant, very well maintained, environmental sound area, and we could see school buses around the block. So this is how much impressive their plant was back then. And I'm sure now, with a lot of years ahead, and gosh, this is like 33 years ago, I shouldn't really be mentioning those big span of age decades. Anyway, now, Nikolai, I would like you to share with us a lot of your insights, and I would start with certain questions. First of all, let me welcome you on board. Such a webinar, I think, comes in a very timely and very expected um, time of the year, right after the COVID-19's lockdowns, where a lot of people might have missed out on what's going on in Europe and in some of the markets. And it is a timely webinar just to recap of what's happening. Let me just ask you, Nikolai, in an overall situation of having come out of the COVID-19 lockdown, and it's been also quite distant since we've had some physical conferences. So that is where we would like to get your insight on what do you think of the overall copper recycling position in Europe. I would start in your area to start with, and I'll move into some other sectors as well. Would you share some of the thoughts?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Salam. On my hand, first, I would like to thank Waste and Recycling Middle East magazine for inviting me and organizing this webinar. I believe the talks will be interesting and will give an idea about the copper recycling sector worldwide as we started in India. Now to your question, in general, secondary copper recycling sector is doing well. During early and late summer times, European consumers procured sufficient stocks, which gives us a security for the last quarter of the year, and especially in case of a new severe restrictions, because you said that we are just coming back from the lockdown, but maybe a new one is waiting us around the corner. Also, the good market conditions like a high LME, strong availability of the scrap, motivated the traders to keep running in the usual quiet August and catch up with the lost volumes during the COVID lockdowns. On the other hand, the industrial scrap supply was lagging due to the lower industrial activities. We expect the availability of the industrial scrap to pick up October, November this year, as we hope also that economy will restart again in a full speed unless something else happens.
Okay, well, that is really something good to hear. That now the bad thing, which we don't want to think of, is another bout of corona virus, which may bring in another lockdown. But anyhow, now the major information or the news in the market with the Metallo's acquisition by Arubis, that has made the group is the world largest copper recycler. Now that is apparently has bode well for Metallo. What is your insight on having that acquisition, and what is the benefit Metallo can reap in the near future?
Thank you for the question. Officially, as from 1st of June, Metallo Group, with its two plants, we have a plant in Spain and in Belgium, are part of Arubis family. And it's a growth story for both groups. For Metallo, we celebrate 100 years last year. After founding, we are now joining a strong industrial group that will allow us to further develop in the multi-metal recycling business model and to roll out our zero waste strategy. We're going to have behind us a strong partner that will support all those factors.
Well, I think in some of the commodities and some of the timings, merging and joining bigger groups can really be of a great, robust foundation facing the challenges in the near future. Now, I understand Metallo has always been very keen on technology and very, in fact, thinking outrightly and proactively. I understand that huge millions of dollars and euros were invested since the year 2000s, and to the extent of 200 million euros now since then. What is the new technologies you think that Metallo is focusing on, considering the new challenges of having the pretty flat bottom lines for the copper usual traditional business of copper. How did technology help Metallo coming into a special niche? And what do you think that can be shared with our participants? Perhaps that will be an eye-opener. You want to give some thoughts about technology?
Yeah, well, the good thing about Metallo Group is that the creativity of our own R&D department, which allows us to be a market leader in recycling of complex materials. We continuously invest in our technologies in order to stay up to date and align with the changing scrap qualities. All we know that copper scrap today and alloys are not the scrap of 10 or 20 years ago. Similar to trends in society, scrap evolves in certain ways. Alloys made 10 years ago are no longer available today, and more exotic combinations pop up on the market, which is the end will become a scrap. At that point in time, refineries have to fine-tune their processes to be able to cope with those more complex scrap packages. For example, I can think of a switch to lead-free in portable applications, which these days is resulting in bismuth-bearing alloys. So everybody needs to be able and work on their investments and technologies to be able to cope with the new market conditions and what the alloys will be in the future.
Well, I do understand that it pays off to invest in technology, especially when I visited one of your sites. I've realized precious metals have been extracted, and that is not a secret. You get gold, silver, platinum, etc. So I'm sure there is, at the end of the day, a lot of payback to this technology. And I think in the near future, we all have to think forward, not to realize on this old orthodox kind of operations to face the new challenges. Now, regulations in the meantime, of course, and the regulatories and legislations, I'm sure it's one of those difficult, I can say, conditions to any business. And it is one of the challenges that always there will be a lot of resistance into how to cope with the regulations. How is the EU regulations coming up? Are they pretty much within the pro-recycling economy, or do you face any challenges you want to share with us?
Well, thanks for the question, because I think this is important for everybody to realize how the regulations are important, and especially in Europe, but I think that will be also for everywhere in the world. They will become more and more stricter. Suppliers will have to pay more attention to the environmental side of our business. That will reflect on additional documentations, permits, notifications, and this will apply not just for Europe, but as I said, other parts of the world as well. And it's for both consumer and suppliers will have to take more responsibility to that extent. In Europe, for example, in all fine materials, drosses, residues, the lead and the zinc in the alloys, if it's present more than 0.5% or 0.1%, it's considered as a amber list dangerous waste, and for those notification is needed, and the control, it's every there, and it's more and more strict. So everybody needs to pay attention to that one, and also processing the scrap at their end, they need to be very careful.
Well, now we understand that regulations and legislations can really change the landscape of the entire economy. And from what I understand, I'm sure that there will be always challenges, and the more we can see evolving EPA controls, the more we as recyclers have to cope with the regulations and changes to stay ahead of the game. Now, we understand that is the unavoidable question that relates to the COVID-19. Now, I'm sure it had a lot of devastating impact in Europe and on the recycling operations in particular, apart from the human, I would say, losses that it is sad to hear about the evolvement of the COVID-19. What is the impact on your operations? And had Metallo been able to work 24/7 within their system, or you've had, considering the fact that you run a big operation, and I know that when I visited your plant back then, you had 100 tons furnaces that they cannot be shut down regardless of any circumstances. So how has the impact been on your operation disturbances, and how did you manage to get by?
Thank you for the question. COVID-19 has created headaches and worries, like everybody. But for us, first place was the health and safety of our Metallo employees and families. This resulted in a well-known home office situation for the departments where home office concept could be introduced, and rethinking social interactions within the company, keeping in mind all rules, regulations, and safety measurements that were already in place, because as a refinery, we have a lot of to wearing masks, gloves, and etc. were already there, but also implementing an additional given by the government. For us, it's important to keep COVID out of the company because, as you said, we have big operations. We're running 24/7, 365 days. So we have to keep COVID out of the company. If one worker, we work on shifts and teams, and if one person is out, entire team is out. So far till today, thanks to the responsibility of every person in the company, we are managing with the works, and we have no cases with the COVID, or if there is just a very limited ones, and we are fully operating during the whole lockdown. There was, of course, a problem with the supply in the periods of April and May, but thanks to the global footprint of our company and the possibility to be present in around the world, we managed to secure the quantities needed to keep running. And I would say that the first quarter of the year was one of the best in the 5 years. Our production was running like 100%. So we use all the material we had as a stock, and now we had to be on the safe side. So we are prepared in case of a lockdown that may happen in the winter or in the coming 4 months. We are well prepared for that. Or we hope we are prepared. Nobody can prepare, but we hope we are prepared for that time.
So to cope with all the health and safety requirements, you believe it wasn't so difficult for Metallo, being already running on a very high pace of environmental and health and safety regulations, but I'm sure it has added up to your cost of production to an extent and would have curtailed the normal flow of even the office, and somehow, if not on the operations and on the bottom lines, I'm sure it has affected the personnel and the family structure of everybody's being in a depressed mood, really working on remote basis.
Definitely. And that's what I said, that thanks to everybody, every employee and their responsibilities, we manage. Of course, there is some, side effects. Sometimes we are a bit slow than the usual speed of sending reports or documentation because of the home office structure. But I think that's understandable for everybody because it's all around the world. And the responsibility of the employees, I can give an example that many people canceled their vacations and they stayed within the families at home, not traveling, just to make sure that they don't get infected by traveling around.
Well, I think it has also the bright side of the fence when a lot of families got to know each other and reunite for an unprecedented sort of a mandatory lockdown. We got to know all family members quite well. In times when we had to see them only very few hours or very barely an hour or a few hours in the week. Now we had a lot of informative and family intimacy and reunion. I will just get to one more question here. You said the first quarter was your best in terms of revenue. Does that have anything to do with the Chinese closing down on imports of scrap metals due to their recent policies, where you had an overspill of supplies, or was that related to any other factors? Whether you like to share, I don't want to come into any personal questions, but is it
No.
the quantity that has provided you the best of the year's income?
Well, first, it was the a very good operation of the old teams in the company, which means that we were fully operating with 100%, with no close downs or shutdowns for any maintenances or any problems. So that's the first side. Second was the good supply that we had and end of the year, beginning of the year, which is, of course, somehow is resulted through because of the China-America, how to say,
Trade
interaction or war, yeah, because a lot of material from, especially from United States, is coming to Europe. But still, also today, there is a impact on the uncertainty of China regulations on importing scrap. This is also makes an input to Europe, where a lot of people are securing and selling to Europe because their uncertainties what's going to happen with China. For the rest, I think it's a very good markets because of the this raising LME. That's also is supporting the traders to keep working, and as I said earlier, to recover some of the losses during the lockdown.
Now, one last question here, Nikolai. I know we have time to keep up with. Do you think the worst is behind us, or do you expect another bout of COVID-19 in the autumn?
I'm an optimistic person, and I hope that the worst was in beginning of the year, when the virus was not that known as of today for the doctors. But what I can hear and see in Europe, and not only from my colleagues or partners, we are expecting another strict and let's say more severe conditions in the coming months, which hopefully, or I hope, will not reflect into the business, and the business will be running, but there will be like more restrictions on putting masks, not going out, or keep like a circle of 4 or 5 people. One of the good things for our business, the recycling business, that in most countries it is considered as essential. So the recycling business was going on during even the lockdown in March, April, May. Especially in Europe, most of the countries, there was, of course, a problem with the transport, closed borders, etc. But the recycling business in most of the countries in Europe is considered as essential, and people were able to work.
Nikolai, it was great to have you on board. You stay safe, healthy with the family. At the end of the webinar, if we have another interaction, if time permits, we will get back to you. Now,
Sure.
we will move
Thank
on.
You.
I think I'll give it back to Dr. Swaliha.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Salam. Now, the next presentation is actually by the chair himself. So he will speak about the impact of COVID-19 on the sector in the Middle East, and also a little bit on the outlook. Engineer Salam.
Thank you very much. I mean, I was quite honored to chair this session, and for me to give an insight about the Middle East, I think I will try to avoid the repetition of what we have heard from our other 2 speakers. Middle East is somehow being centrally located between the East and the West. Usually the impact of the market may hit us in more of a soft landing, because we have the options to really swing metals back into either uh, uh, Asian side or to Europe or even the local and domestic consumption. But with regards to copper, as I would like to share some of the thoughts related to initially the current market trends, and I will take it from more of a, a macro point of view, and then I'll come into the related to the Middle East micro insight of what's going on. I mean, the situation overall for copper has been quite dicey, shifting from what we call fundamental to sentimental. It depends on what is the geopolitical and what is the main impact which has been driving the market. Last year, as you all know, that the trade war with the United States and China has driven most of this of the market from a global basis to a commodity trend, and we have seen that with the truce that has been reached out in the beginning of this year, it has more or less went back into more of fundamentals and not related to any external factors. Now, with the copper scrap being almost one third of the overall market share, which was hit by the less demand, of course, with the Chinese having closed their doors with regards to the import regulations and even having considered the higher grades of copper as waste. They're still not considered as resources. So they were more of shifting towards the copper concentrates, which is directly imported from the African mines directly. Now, of course, now we've realized that this year has started off with more of a surplus in terms of supplies, 27,000 tons were compared to a 41,000 tons deficit in January of this year. Middle East market has pretty much been balanced out in terms of supply and demand. There were not so much of eager on the import side because they were well positioned in terms of having enough cathode supplies for the copper rod mills for their own production. At the same time, for the scrap metals, of course, we've had a lot of the devastating effect on the operations in general. During lockdown, we have had almost about less than 50% scale of operations across the board, albeit we have just recovered back into almost high scale of operations, yet not on full swing, but I would say on almost about 75%. It was quite a challenging situation because those who were running on full swing could not cope with the overheads and all the expenditures which have dented their bottom line. So if we just think of the effect on the pandemic, in fact, we realized that the OECD has really lowered the forecast for 2020 by 0.5% to 2.4%. And if we run into another bout of COVID-19 by the fall, God forbid, that will drop it further down by 1.5%, which will make the growth barely on 1%, which is quite a worrying situation because we understand that Middle East is in particular having been relying on the oil, and I'm talking about the GCC countries, with the historic drop of the oil prices that has really turned a lot of the budgets into deficit. Now we realized how all these sectors were badly affected, from traveling to tourism into auto and aero industries. Construction was almost on standstill. Real estate have lost about 40% to 50% of its value with no demand. Consumer confidence has been dropping to pretty low levels where it is almost hitting more of a depression situation. Now, I can say that the overall situation is not much different from the rest of the world economy, but albeit the lockdown has had devastating impact on the human suffering, apart from raising a lot of sovereign debts, which has affected the um, infrastructure spending budgets, which were a major contributor to copper scrap in terms of generation, as well as it has reduced the production of the primary aluminum smelters, which in turn has affected the downstream industry pretty much big times. So it wasn't very pleasant half of the year, and we believe barely the recovery of oil prices have brought us back into an affordable level to I would say, resume some of the activities after the lockdown has been lifted. You can see a lot of restaurants have become open and hotels. So hopefully, with the trend is moving positively forward, we can have quite a revival of the operations of the entire recycling plants around here. Now, we see that this is an amplifying risk related to having the panic and a lot of the challenges we have seen here. And I can say a lot of it had to do with the media overreacting and spreading the fears around the news. We have a counter for any infected COVID-19. It comes on the first news, so you have to think today whether should I go out and should I operate on full swing because the numbers have gone up, or if they've come down, should I go ahead and carry out my plans and what I had on the agenda. Of course, we had always the full side of the glass when we talk about any side effects of the COVID-19. I believe we've had a lot of opportunities in the sense that this was a wake-up call for a lot of organizations and operations where they had to restructure their complete hierarchy. It has also given the idea that back to the gravity of having to really get your hands involved with the day-to-day operations and hands-on management. So that is the one side. Innovation has also been part of the advantages where the good old system of running yard operations and the business, we believe it has become antiquated, where somebody has to really think on what is the next move and how we can really work smartly, but not more hard like we had done in the past years. Now, the virtual conferences, as we see here, has really bridged the gap where a lot of commuting has been reduced, and we realize that things can be well done if you're sitting back at home. So you don't really have to adopt the old system which was carried out decades ago. There got to be some way of how to do in what we call augmented reality. Do the best out of what you can, maximize on returns. It has given also a lot of diversification thoughts to those who have been relying on one operations or one source of income. If you're doing one item of production of whichever metals, you should really think of different items. If you're doing normal recycling of yard operations, you got to think of vertical integration and how things can be done for the future sustainability. Now, you need to also realized that you got to be part of the big umbrella. Individual companies may not have the support that they will expect unless they are part of a bigger organization like BIR, BMR, MRAI. So that is where we share our concerns and try to come up with better solutions forward. And technology, I would say, has put a lot of investment out here with relates to the EVs as well as the data centers basis, considering that we all run on virtual bases. You need a lot of clouds which need to run on databases, which requires more copper consumption, which has forecasted by the 2030 to have 230,000 tons of copper that it is expected. Now, of course, now with the Chinese scenario of having their regulations on the imports of scrap, it has depressed the market altogether. But nonetheless, there is always a chance to run the materials to another country. So it has given more of a innovative thought of how to do your business, reallocate your business into either other locations. And with the Chinese themselves have realized that they have to really think out of the box and go out in the overseas market and set up their own recycling units, as it has been the case in Asia and the Middle East. Nonetheless, we have more EBA requirements and restrictions, and throughout the social distancing and all, I think it's all together, you can say, an opportunity to restructure your business, your thoughts, and the how to handle the future. All I'd say is the market here in the Middle East is pretty much now getting back to slightly back to normality, but we have opportunities lying ahead in the sense that the geopolitical situation in the area is not always comfortable. But with thinking of the reconstruction opportunities, I would feel that there will be a lot of demand for the metals out here, and cable companies seems to be running for next year on full orders. Apart from that, we all keep the fingers crossed. If we don't have another bout of COVID-19, I think it'll be all good for business. If not, we have to really keep the fingers crossed. With that, I would like to thank the opportunity of Dr. Swaliha and Waste and Recycling magazine for giving me this opportunity. And I would, as a speaker, leave it there within the time. So I'll go back to chairing the session with Mr. Mayank, whom we promised to give some questions. And of course, the audience will be more welcome to share their questions on board. So I make it the end of my presentation for now. And we go back to Mr. Mayank. If you're ready for some questions, Mr. Mayank, I'll be happy to share some of the questions that I have in mind for you. Dr. Swaliha, do you have any questions coming out from the audience? I think we're doing good. So okay.
I have one question as well, Salam. So anytime, please keep in mind to let me share it.
Sure. Okay. You got the priority. You're a speaker,
okay,
so
thank
you
very
have
much.
carpet works. Okay.
Thank you. A question. There is a rumors that India is planning to control the import of copper and aluminium while developing policies to limit shipments from China and other Asian nations to protect domestic producers. As your producers, are you familiar with this? Is it really going to happen? Is it taking place, or it's just a rumors?
No. So the monitoring is of a different nature. The government wants to monitor the import of the scrap, but that does not mean the government wants to restrict it. The government is more concerned about the lower quality of the scrap coming into India, the pollutants. So that is the purpose. But the purpose is never restricting the import of the scrap. Also, in the scrap, in the garb of scrap, the high value added products are coming. So that is the purpose.
I think they talk about more semi products like a pure copper, copper tubes, copper sheets, cathodes, and things like this. Because the point was to protect the Indian industries and producers. I don't think it's referring for the scrap.
India has been making noise about it because in the garb of scrap, the value-added products, for example, tubes and pipes, etc., are coming, and which is hurting the Indian primary producers. So they made a noise about it. Government heard it, and they decided to start monitoring. So that's about it.
Okay.
So you're suggesting that India is not gonna follow the same steps of the Chinese government with regards to the restrictions on imports. It's on the other hand trying to prevent any semi-finished products from coming into their back door within the scrap specifications to protect the local industry. This is how you see it, Mr. Mayank?
Yes, exactly. This is how the situation is. In fact, the government does not have any plan to restrict the import of scrap. In fact, government would come out with a non-ferrous metal policy and recycling policy. That is how the government is thinking. So a scenario akin to China is not visible in India.
Okay, well, I didn't think so because with India being the fastest growing economy with a GDP of 7.5, considering to the rest of the world, which is even less than half of what is the growth rate in India, the Moody's government will always think positively in how to promote the economy. And with more, I would say, consumption for copper and coming into a lot of the electric vehicles. And you mentioned the electrification policy of the government, which will be more or less vowing to have 100% electrification, I think, in the near future. That will definitely be a good sign for more copper demand. Now, considering that the growth which we see and with the EVs and the two-wheelers and a lot of the electrical gadgets, which has come up with the standards of livings of the, I would say, almost more than half a billion population of India. I think there'll be more demand on copper. How do you see the main drivers for the economy on one hand, and how do you see that you can cope with the copper requirements for the near future?
Okay, so yes, of course, there are strong drivers which will take up the demand of copper in India, and I've explained those drivers in my presentation too. But then your question, how will India source this increased demand of copper? Now, if you look at the production of primary copper in India, India stands at 6th place in the world in primary copper production. But India does not have so much of ores. India import ores and then produces. And out of its total production of primary copper, some 1/3 is exported out of India. So if there is additional demand of copper in India, I mean, the export will fill the uh, this addition in local demand. Similarly, if we look at recycling, now see half of the India's recycled products are exported out of India. So which means if there is additional demand, that recycled products will actually be consumed in India. So
Did you say, sir, did you say, I'm sorry, half of the scrap generated is exported out of India? I'm sorry if I missed something.
yeah, what I said is some out of the total primary production, 1/3 is exported out of India, and
Okay.
out of total scrap consumption in India, 50% is imported, and major chunk is exported in the form of secondary products.
Oh, okay, secondary product. Okay, now what is the proportions of consuming copper scrap compared to copper cathodes and concentrates for copper billet producers like yourself?
If
In
we
your
talk,
case, I presume you would have a lot of reliance on copper scrap as a feedstock. But in case of those other cable producers, do they follow the same step of yours, relying mainly on copper scrap, or they use copper cathodes, and to what extent?
so if we look at the statistics in India, out of the total primary production of copper, some 400,000 tons every year is produced by internally mined, domestically mined copper ore, and some uh, say 150,000 tons of copper product comes through recycling. So if we talk of the internal resources in India, it would be a ratio of somewhere around 1:3, close to 1:3, where 1 stands for the scrap and 3 stands for the primary copper produced from domestically mined ores.
Well, considering the advantages in terms of economy as well as environmental and a lot of the social CSR, corporate and social responsibilities, we would like to see more of copper consumption coming from the scrap sector and less primary. That is how we can advocate for the circular economy. Let me shift into another topic, which of course relates to the COVID-19. How do you think your group has managed to cope with the downside of the COVID-19, and whether you lost any production at all, or have you now resumed back on track? And what is your thoughts on this? It's very interesting to compare with Europe and India and Middle East.
When the lockdown began, of course, the government ordered to close down all the industries. Although, if we talk of our individual industry, we went to the government with a presentation, and we were allowed to run our production to, to the extent of 20-25% of capacities. So to that extent, we kept running the production. The government wanted us to keep the workers inside the factory premise, so we arranged their residence inside, and we keep running the production to the extent of 20-25%. As far as the logistics are concerned, during entire lockdown, the exports and imports mechanism were working in India, although not fully efficiently, but to some extent. So we were able to export because we have export orders for our products. So we were able to produce some 20-25%, and we were able to push it through export avenue. So that's how we managed. Yes.
I can understand. Just I would like to ask your opinion of whether you like to get any legislations or regulatories addressed to certain message that you would think that will boost the industry of copper recycling. And if at all you do have a message, what is the best platform you think you can use to address those, if you like, certain concerns?
Is your question what should be the legislative changes in India to promote recycling?
Yes, sir. If you have any message to the legislators that you would like to address to which may accommodate the circular economy and for a particular use of copper production like yours, what would you think the government could do or the legislators could do, or maybe associations put their hands together to try to advocate for that, if at all there is any?
If we look at India, uh, it is vast country with vast population, uh, and the biggest problem is there is no organized collection of scrap, and there is no organized trade of scrap, and there is no organized recycling of scrap. This the end of the life items and the scrap falling into the hands of the unorganized scrap collectors and then finally getting into unorganized recycling poses challenge to the environment. It causes environmental hazards. At the same time, causes a lot of hurdles in terms of unhealthy competition from those unorganized sectors for the organized sector. So, for promoting recycling and in turn making the country healthy, the government must come out with the quick legislations and strict legislations for systematic collection of scrap and systematic recycling through systematic trade.
There are questions here from the audience. We have one question specifically for Mayank right now from Martin here. He asks you, like, with almost 100,000 new COVID-19 infections every day, is it realistic to say that scrap or copper demand will be back on track soon?
Okay, so if you look at India, and as you are reading in the newspapers, the cases are growing every day. But then if you see at the death rate, it is very low. Earlier, we used to hear some distant relatives or some known people getting infected by COVID. But now is the time when our close relatives and close friends have started getting infected with COVID. But then there are no death rates. I mean, there are no symptoms. What I want to tell you is there is less of fear in India now against COVID because this virus has gone pretty weak in India. People have stopped caring for this. People get sick for a day. They have throat infection or something like that, a fever for a day. And that's it. I mean, they are on the work. I mean, in my factory, there are 1,300 workers working. Immediately after lockdown, there was a fear in the workers. They did not used to come, or if they used to come, they were quite afraid. Now I see, and in my factory also, we got all the workers checked a few weeks back, and there were some 12 workers found infected with COVID who did not have any symptom. So what I want to tell you is the fear has gone, and this virus has gone weak. And I also feel there is an inflated hype about this disease. It is not so lethal as we can see in India. In all, I mean, roads are busy, factories are working, people are back on track, so demand will come. It is not going to impact.
I think I agree with you, Mr. Mayank. The COVID-19 has really been overexposed in the media, and to a certain extent, one should not really be stressed down and taking it in a complete negative quarantine until he recovers. If you live within your day-to-day operations, being more of, if you like, hygienic and getting more into back to the old days of organic food and stuff. And particularly copper is our main topic. Drink out of copper bottles where it can get you the copper. Dr. Copper will get you a lot of minerals and get you off.
Mr. Salam, there is one question also for Nikolai.
Yeah.
Nikolai, Mr.
Yes,
Rajesh,
I'm here.
Yes, Mr. Rajesh would like to know, Mr. Rajesh Agarwal from RKG International, he says, now the prices of copper are like 50% higher than last 3 months. So why do you think there is so much disparity in the short time?
Well, what we think about the copper price is that it has to do with a lot of money that came into the commodities, and that boosts the price and made a balloon. This is what we think is the reason for the high copper price, because a lot of governments gave a lot of cheap money, and this was invested in commodities and equities, and this is what boosts the price. That's our opinion.
Well, there is another factor, if you agree with me, Nikolai, that is the the mining production has also not been as on the same pace as it used to. Now, the COVID-19 had something to do with it, where a lot of the mine workers were locked down within the mine itself, and no telling on what sort of infected laborers were also suffering from that. And I also heard that the high treatment of refining for the concentrates has also got to do with raising the prices higher. So on one hand, yes, the demand has reduced a little bit, but the supply flow from the mines has also taken an equal pace, which left more of a balanced supply and demand to a stage. You're more expert in copper than me, but I think that would be something to share.
There's several. There is never one factor. So there is several factors that are taking place in a row, and we also have to be careful what we say, so that we don't how to say, give a wrong message to the people and they start investing in copper, but then it drops tomorrow. So
okay.
Let's wait and see.
You gotta be careful. Yeah, copper is a safe haven.
Just back up your position daily, and you're on the safe side. Don't speculate. That's what I can say.
I think you're right, Nikolai. A lot of the investments and a lot of the banks' contracts were leveraged against copper contracts. So that is proven that it is quite a safe haven, at least out of the base metals. I think we are pretty much on time, unless Dr. Swaliha would like to add something to it. I am quite impressed with Nikolai and Mr. Mayank's insight, and I do appreciate the platform to having really a nice combination, Middle East, Europe, India, giving their views. And I hope our participants have been there to take some benefits out of this webinar. And with that, if you allow me to just give you the floor back, Dr. Swaliha, I wish everybody to be safe, healthy, and good in health until our next webinar. Floor is yours, Dr. Swaliha.
Thank you, Engineer Salam. It's been a very engaging session. Thank you so much for chairing this session. And I'd like to thank all our esteemed panelists for joining us here today and sharing their insights. Nikolai, Mayank, thank you very much. And to all those who have tuned in, thank you so much for your participation. There are more such interesting sessions coming up soon, so stay tuned and stay safe.